People like Lester Flatt, Tony Rice, Bob Dylan, Hank Williams, and a whole bunch of others all have one thing in common, and that is a vintage Martin D-28. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about vintage Martin D-28.
Iconic.
It is an iconic, you are absolutely right. It is an iconic guitar. Probably one of the most known models of all time. And it has gone through so many changes. The Martin D-28 is really kind of a fun story because a lot of people talk about wanting one, and yet there's so many different iterations, we don't know which one is the one that they want. So those early ones had Brazilian rosewood, Adirondack spruce tops. Then they were kind of modified. The bracing was moved around. They went to Sitka spruce. They went to Indian rosewood. It changed from herringbone to no herringbone, but yet it was still called the D-28. So this is kind of what makes the sound of Martin. In fact, I think even more than the D-18, even though the D-18 is super popular, when people think Martin guitars, they think of the D-28.
Absolutely.
The booming low end, the rich, crisp highs, all of that in one guitar and just being able to power its way through anything.
And like you said at the top of the video, some of the most iconic artists in history, they're synonymous with their D-28, their vintage D-28.
But the values of a D-28, that was what everybody was after. It had the sound, it had... Now, nowadays, I think that's kind of changed. Now there's as much of a value for the mahogany sound.
I think the D-28 still outprices it, though, don't they?
It does absolutely outprice it. But it was funny watching the vintage market. It went through, when I first started playing, the 1930s D-28, those were selling for $20,000 and $30,000, where you could pick up a 1930s D-18 for $6,000. It was nowhere near the value in there. But it's kind of, again, as the decades change, those D-28s moved on, 18 started to catch up, and now they're all moving accordingly. But still, everybody is seeking those D-28s.
And when you find one, it's a very special occasion. Even for us at the shop, if a vintage early pre-war D-28 comes in the shop, we all get giddy and get excited about it because it's a pretty rare bird to just come across.
Yep. Well, this one here is a little bit interesting. We're holding a 1948 D-28. This guitar does have Brazilian rosewood. It does have a Sitka spruce top. This is after they changed it over. And does have non-scalloped bracing from the factory. That was the thing that was also changed, as well as its bracing location. Yet, still has an iconic Martin sound. It's different than the 1930s. It's different than the early 40s. It's definitely different than the 50s, 60s. Every era had its own kind of trademark sound, even though it was still a D-28. Different sounding guitar.
Yeah.
For that difference in sound, there was a lot of things that kind of happened. Originally, you'll hear about the pre-war sounds. That's pre-1938. In between 37 and 38 is when they changed. But the braces were further forward. That freed up the top to move a whole lot more than what what the common or the modern day D-28. Now, again, they're kind of doing some changes again one more time. But the more modern D-28s did. By pulling that further forward, you had more resonance in this back channel here. Now, again, at this point, the D-28 and D-18s were all brand new. The Dreadnought was so new that people started to see a little bit more belly happening here. It started to move more.
A little less strength back there.
And also people weren't taking care of their guitars nearly as well as what hopefully all of you guys are doing now. So you start to get the bellies rising, action changing, all those kind of things. So what Martin decided to do is pull it back, and they moved it further back. Now that gave more structure in this area, giving it more strength, but also affects that tone
resistance
quite a bit. Again, the Dreadnought becomes super, super popular. The war comes along, so now we've got a change over in the size of the neck. We went from 1 3/4 nut widths to 1 11/16 in the early 40s. During the war, there was no metal, so they kind of took away a lot of the metal parts. And then when it got to this era right here, we're back from the war. We switched over to Sitka spruce tops. We took away the scallop bracing because, again, you could build more guitars and not have to worry about them kind of imploding on themselves. Wasn't as much attention to detail because they were building much more guitars than that they had ever done before.
There's a big boom in the guitar market.
And then that continued to grow as this kept going. Martin kept growing as a company. The Dreadnoughts, D-28s, D-18s became just the guitars to have. And that, by the way, just so you know, is where the HD-28 comes in. HD brought back herringbone for the trim as well as scallop bracing, and that happened in the late 70s, I believe, 77 to 79.
It was
somewhere
late
in
80s
there.
when they added the truss rod. Right?
Yeah, and then added an adjustable truss rod to it by, I think, 83. Now, again, we get into the late 90s, early 2000s. They start kind of going back to that pre-war sound, and Martin starts searching for ways to do things like adding Adirondack tops again, moving bracing back, hide glue, scallop bracing, doing all those kind of things as it kind of grew as a company. Now we're back to this guitar. This guitar came into the shop. It was actually in a collection from a fella who was here in Springfield, Missouri, whose widow decided to get a hold of us and help him move some things around. I then sold this guitar to one of my guitar students who went and put some money and work into it. We put in brand new Evo frets here, had that work done, had a new bridge built for it that was correct because it was split. Made sure the headstock was good and solid. It at one time had a break in it and now it's glued back on there. We put brand new Waverly tuners that are relict that look more accurate. It's not perfectly accurate, but Waverly does a great job with an antiqued or relict oval button tuner on here.
Can I interject here?
Please
I know that
do.
we're going to get somebody in there, and this is a very common thing we get all the time. You mentioned that he replaced the frets with Evo fret wire. A lot of people with these vintage guitars go, oh, why would you ever change the frets on that guitar? You need to keep the original frets on there.
Because it was unplayable.
That's like saying, I have a vintage car, you still have to have the original tires on it. Like
Brakes.
The brakes should be the original brakes. These things they're dispensable parts of the instrument that do get worn out. It doesn't add value having the original frets, especially if they're completely worn and
Unless
unplayable.
they were like mint, yeah.
Yeah, if they're mint, that may add $100 to the value of the guitar.
I don't
Not
know.
much, but it's like having the original strings. You know, these are supposed to be disposable.
That's probably a much better one. Yeah, this one's still 1949, 48, original strings. You're going to love it. So now we get into why is it that people want vintage guitars?
Like almost the emotional connection to this. Do you think owning a guitar from this era, such an iconic instrument to a D-28, does that really change the way people approach the guitar or their feelings of connection with their instrument?
I think it's a yes and a no question at the same time, and I'll explain why. You expected me to go yes, absolutely. Yeah. I personally think it did. Like I have my 1940. It changed how I play. I play. My right hand is now built for that guitar. I played it so much, it had the sound I wanted, and I learned to meld with it. I became part of that guitar, and to me, when I play that, to me, that's what I sound the best for what I'm looking for. Even when I play other great guitars, it's not the same as that. And there's a certain character that only happens with vintage guitars. Now, I'm going to take the second side of this, and this is why I say it depends. The owner who bought this guitar loved that tone, loved what it did, but he also had bought a new guitar that everything was set up perfectly and accurately. And this is the problem with almost every vintage guitar, including my own and everybody else's. There's so many things that happen to them over the time that make them not play perfectly. We expect a whole lot more from modern day guitars.
Yeah.
Mandolins, you know that. People expect the setups, the playability, things to be done at a higher level than what these came out when they originally showed up, out on the market. These were not expected to be the fine-tuned machines that we see from high-end guitars now. So yes and no, Jeremy. That's where I got to my yes and no.
I've seen it happen on a personal basis with musicians, like really road musicians, when they've come across that vintage guitar, and we can think of numerous guitar players, mandolin players, banjo players, Aaron McDarris with his banjo, that once they get that one vintage instrument, they connect with it in a way. It has this pride and this almost psychological effect on their playing, knowing they're owning such a historic piece of an instrument that has such history to it. So I think there is some psychological benefit to it. It may be just that we really hold these at such high esteem that owning one that's your own, I personally can see where it changes.
I think it's more than even psychological. I genuinely do believe there is a tone to this guitar that you cannot get out of any new guitar. There's a tone to every vintage instrument that I have ever played that I've never played another thing that feels and sounds that way. But it comes down to, does that connect with you as a person? And you've seen it, where certain ones
Tony
do.
Rice is a great example of that. This year was one of his original guitars.
He had a guitar from '48, as well as Lester Flatt had one. There's been a lot of people in this era that.
But then when Tony got his hands on Clarence's guitar, it changed things.
It changed
despite
him.
the fact that Clarence kind of hated that guitar.
Well, yeah, but also take into account if we're going with that particular guitar, there was also, like you said, there was a psychological benefit to that. That was his hero's guitar. I mean, if you gave me Tony's guitar, I guarantee you I'd think it was the best guitar that ever existed, and I would meld with that thing in a way because it all came from there. That it would be the same thing. If I was a banjo player and I got Earl's banjo, I'm going to find Aaron getting Sonny's banjo. If it's your hero, there's that connection too. So I guess we get back to our first question. Will a vintage Martin change you as a person, as a musician?
Well, I think we can answer that by saying the vintage Martin D-28 has changed the complete arc of musical history and guitar building. Like this is what so many guitar builders got in the business to build. They want to replicate this, and that's across the gamut of how many famous guitars are out there. So yes, this iconic instrument has changed the music that we listen to, the players, the way they approached it, and the builders who are now building guitars. Yep. This is kind of the prototype for all that.
I think no matter what, if you get a vintage instrument like this, it will change you as a musician because you're going to get things out of it you've never had before. Whether or not it's going to be the end all, I don't know. I think it's all going to depend on you as a person. I think the only way you're going to find that out is to literally get your hands on one and go, this did it. This is what I had. And I think most people will find that, yes, there is a bit of that just happens.
And one point we have left off here, but historically speaking, it has been very consistent that it's not a bad investment. They have gone up consistently every single decade by quite a bit. I know we talked to George Gruen about this, and he said the Martin D-28, the Martin D-18 would have been the best two investments you could have made buying those 20 years ago, and he says they continue to go up.
I agree.
So there's one more point for that.
All right, buy one tomorrow. Buy this one. You can have this guitar right here.
Tell us, did it change your life?
Yeah, if you've already bought it, write in the comments and let us know, hey, this guitar changed my life.
My wife left me. I left the house. That's fun. I love having these vintage guitars in here and getting to talk about them.
It is a whole bunch of fun. And gosh, this one's beautiful too. Did you see this Brazilian rosewood? Woo! Powerful guitar. Well, guys, if vintage Martins are your thing, we did another one on my guitar. Actually,
the one that changed your life.
The one that changed my life. It is the John's Guitar Vault series, where we talk about various different guitars that I've owned and the story of them. And one of them is my 1940 D-18. We do have a video for that. It's going to be right over here. You can click on that on the screen. Please do so. And again, guys, thanks for watching. We will see you on the next video.